Hello, everyone. This is Adam Fishman, the Executive Director of American Friends of Likud. And once again, we are very excited to have you join us on our AFL webinar briefing, Insider Briefing series. And today we are excited to have with us a very, very good and a friend for many, many years, Minister Yuli Edelstein. Thank you very much for joining us today. I see that you're traveling, but we appreciate you taking the time out for us this evening here in Israel. Things have been moving, certainly with respect to the Ministry of Health and COVID. Israel is doing very well. I'm sure you'll tell us all about that. We're seeing reports, however, that the Indian variant of the Ministry of Health has urged the halt of direct flights right now for the next few weeks, perhaps, to and from India. We're still concerned about variants coming in. The other escalations that are going on around the country, whether it be in Jerusalem or on the border with Gaza. I know that there was a cabinet meeting today and reports that should the rocket fire continue, that Israel would move toward a wider scale operation in Gaza. I mean, I live in Modi'in, and throughout Israel, there were siren drills today. Even though we've had the sirens going off and being used for Yom Ha'atzmaut and for Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaShoah, so we know they work. But for some reason, there was a need to still drill the sirens again today, perhaps with an expectation that we may be seeing something more serious coming down the line. With that very brief overview, I'm going to turn it over to our board member in California, Steve Goldberg, to introduce our guest, Minister Edelstein, and then we'll get to your briefing.
It's truly a privilege to introduce Minister Yuli Edelstein. I think if you took a poll of knowledgeable Israelis and asked them which political figure in the past 25 years best combines fierce intelligence, impeccable integrity, honesty, decency, trustworthiness, and overall being a mensch, Yuli Edelstein would be at the top of most people's lists. He was born, I believe, and Yuli, you'll let me know if I get any of this wrong, in the Ukraine, I believe, in 1958. You were inspired to become a Zionist by your grandfather, who taught himself Hebrew when he was 70 years old. You were also inspired by the Leon Uris book, Exodus. You began teaching Hebrew when such was not permitted in the Soviet Union. You were arrested. You were sent to a Soviet prison. You were sent to a Siberian prison for 3 years, where you actually fell off a construction site and broke some bones. You were released, and you were one of the last refuseniks to be allowed into Israel. Minister Edelstein has been on the political scene for 25 years. He helped form the Yisrael B'Aliyah party with Natan Sharansky. He has been Minister of Immigrant Absorption, Minister of Information and Immigrant Affairs, was Speaker of the Knesset for 7 years, where he demonstrated courage at the very end by resigning rather than obeying an order from the Supreme Court that he thought was illegal. He's been the health minister for the past year and deserves much of the credit for Israel's phenomenal success in battling the COVID pandemic. I hope I got that right. And with that, Yuli, if you'll begin with your presentation, and then we have some questions for you.
Thank you, Steve, and I really appreciate all the warm words. Thank you, Adam, for organizing this meeting. And I just hope and dream that sooner than later we'll be able to meet in person with all the participants. The way we used to in the Knesset or during debates, how to ask questions. Roughly speaking, we'll divide it into two: the coronavirus situation and the political situation in Israel. It may be a paradox, but it's much easier these days to talk about COVID-19, because here we are really doing great. I do have to say that we are still very cautious because of different variants, as Adam already mentioned. And at the same time, after a very difficult year, and after, in my position as Minister of Health, I used to be the bad cop all the time, and basically every day facing protests next to my house. This sector, that sector, those who feel that they are being neglected, something is not allowed for them, we are closing something. And right now, to see people practically celebrating with hotels full, with theaters and stadiums full, I do believe that it's a result of very hard work of the health ministry, of the whole medical staff who was involved, not just with vaccination. I think that the difficult work started before the vaccination, but during even very difficult times, when if I recall, I can tell you about meetings in the health ministry back in May, already discussing the possibility of buying the vaccines. And when for the first time, I learned from the professionals in the ministry that there is a number of companies developing vaccines with different technologies, I said to them two things. A, Israel is a very small country, a very small market in economic or commercial terms. That's why the moment any of these companies will have a vaccine, they weren't even looking our direction. We have to buy ourselves a spot in the line to be on the list, and only this is basically the only way for us to ensure that we'll get vaccines sooner or later. The second thing was that I said to them, never put all the eggs in one basket. There are different technologies, there are different companies. No one in the world knows who will finish the race first, how effective this or that vaccine will be. So let's try to get as many companies as possible. Let's try to sign with as many companies as possible. And I do have to say that in the end, as we all know, it really worked. Because I, for one, I'm not ashamed to tell you, I was betting on a totally different company in terms of being first and developing an effective vaccine, and I was wrong. And thank God that we had agreements by that time, both with Pfizer and Moderna. And I here have to say that I very much appreciate the efforts of the Prime Minister, who, the moment we presented him all the possibilities we have, started working like crazy towards Albert Bourla of Pfizer, towards Moderna. Everywhere we would ask him to go to talk to someone. He was there, and the result, we all know. The result was that of all places on earth, Pfizer decided that Israel is the best partner to start the vaccination and to bring quick results. And I do have to say that I'm still excited each day when I look at the numbers of those vaccinated. Once again, I do have to admit my mistake. I never thought that we would get to these numbers because of anti-vaxxers, because of the rumors, because it's a new vaccine. But Israeli citizens were just incredible. And right now we are standing on 5.4 million people who got at least the first shot of the vaccine. Over 5 million already got the second shot. And out of the population of 9.2 millions, out of them, nearly 30% children. I think this is an incredible result. And at every opportunity, I thank the professionals and the Kupot Cholim, our HMOs, for the incredible work they've done. So right now, we see things opening of the Israeli market and all the other spheres of life, as I've said, sports, culture, kids, and so on and so forth. Let's hope that it stays this way. We are still scared of variants. And I just hope that we'll be able to continue the way we behave right now. So these are, as I've said, the good news. The less exciting news is that for the fourth time, we had elections in less than 2 years. And the result is, as one can imagine, more of the same. Each time we can say we were close, we were this, we were that. But unfortunately, there is some, I would say, some bug in the system. And the terrible phrase I'm going to say is that I can't rule out the possibility of the fifth elections because we have a great difficulty in forming the government. The other side, with all their schwitz about how they will form a government immediately, I think is also facing big problems because there is actually no common denominator on the other side except for Raklo Bibi. And I think that they will, as I've said, either won't be able to form a government at all, or they will form some kind of ad hoc government and then, unfortunately, can only postpone the coming elections. Still, you know, we all believe in miracles, so maybe something can happen in the nearest future. But right now, things look pretty gloomy because, as I've said, the chances, I estimate them as very low. And except for the political side, I would very much like to continue as a cabinet minister, and that's all very nice. I want Likud to stay in power. I think, as I've said, we did a very good job during this difficult crisis. Having said all that, we have a country to run. And I can tell you first person singular during this crisis as health minister, how better things could be if there were a normal government and all this strange creation with blue and white. And definitely we finally need a permanent government with ministers who come to work for the whole term with a normal budget for the country and so on and so forth. We are all still recovering from Corona, and as we see during the last couple of days, as Adam mentioned, the security tensions didn't go anywhere. We still see them right in front of us. Jerusalem and Gaza, the Palestinians are soon having elections in Judea and Samaria. It brings enough tension itself. So we are facing a lot of challenges. Iranian issue is still very hot on the plate. And once again, to deal with Iranians for, as we all know, a regional superpower, not just another enemy we're facing. We're used to facing enemies, but with Iranians, it's a real challenge. And, you know, with all these challenges, I think that we have to do everything possible to really create a normally functioning government. Let's hope that we get there, but as I've said, in terms of practical estimation, we are not in a very good position right now. This brings us to probably the last issue I mentioned. It's still unclear what the relations with the present American administration would be. We all hope that they will stay warm and positive, but it's still very, very difficult to judge. It's not necessarily the fault of the present American administration, but it was very difficult to run some serious dialogue with Israel during the election campaign, which means during the last 3 months, and now during this total uncertainty about the next government. So for this reason too, once again, we'd better have a functioning cabinet. Anyway, I'll stop right here in order, as I promised, to enable you to ask questions on the subjects I mentioned or on anything else. More than willing to hear and to try to answer.
I'll start, Yuli, with a question as to Iran and and it combines Iran and the interactions with the American administration. There was some criticism in the international community about the operation in Natanz, and there appear to be warnings from the EU that they would look unfavorably on operations that might interfere with the attempt to get Iran to re-sign the JCPOA. To your knowledge, is the Israeli government concerned? Is it going to be deterred from doing what it has to do for fear of upsetting either the Biden administration or the European Union?
Well, first of all, obviously, I first of all have to say that I don't have first idea who acted in Natanz and what exactly they did. Could be Luxembourg, could be any other country in the world. Though I do have to say that it's not such bad news that someone, as I've said, I don't know who, but someone managed to at least postpone their work on developing nuclear weapons. Now, the short answer to your question, Steve, would be never. Never, ever will be calculating our efforts to prevent Iran from subsidizing, supporting, and basically creating terrorism in our area, and even more so on anything that has to do with the development of nuclear weapons. As we said many times in our meetings, the moment they will have nuclear weapons, it's not the Israeli problem, it's not the problem of even not just of the United States. Everyone in the world who is talking about non-proliferation of nukes should know and understand that the moment Iranians go nuclear, you wouldn't be able to stop, no one would be able to stop Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and probably some other countries in this area from preventing nuclear weapons themselves. So that's what you hear loud and clear from their leaders. They won't let Iran to become a nuclear superpower here in the region without them giving their response in exactly this same area.
Is there faith, to the extent you could say this is a tough question, I understand, that the United States is not going to sign a bad deal with the JCPOA and will listen to Israel's concerns? We've read about delegations going from Israel to Washington, D.C. About that in the hopes of somehow influencing the United States. My hope, and I'll say this bluntly, is that the Israeli leaders are not engaged in wishful thinking on that. What's your comment on that?
As I honestly told you, Steve, I don't know. It's too early to judge. And don't forget that this dialogue and delegations you are talking about included, some of them been postponed because of the situation here. But we are talking about the chief of staff of IDF. We are talking about the head of the National Security Council. We are talking about the chief of Mossad. We are talking about professionals who are talking to their counterparts in the United States. Obviously, the last word goes to the commander-in-chief. But I think that on the professional level, there will be understanding of the security needs, as I've said, not just of Israel, but of the whole region. And we'll see what happens next. No one can tell. I'm sure there will be probably some, let's say, differences of opinion as we learn from some previous administrations, but it's too early to judge.
You mentioned the need for a functioning government. We're all seeing in the news now about the riots in Jerusalem. By the way, we're used to our own riots here in the United States now, but the riots in Jerusalem and now the rockets coming from Gaza. Is the absence of a fully functioning government interfering with the decision-making process about taking steps to quell that? Because it looks as if there is, from our point of view, at least from someone noting that, for example, there's a decision to ease off on the Damascus Gate. They released the barricades that were up, and not to respond also forcefully to the rockets coming from Gaza. Is that a function of the absence of a functioning government, or is that something else?
Well, here I can bring you some good news, as you mentioned, or Adam mentioned, I think, that we have security cabinet meetings, and one good thing I can tell you that in these discussions, you can't, were you a stranger who would be brought into a meeting like that, you wouldn't be able to tell which minister belongs to which party. It doesn't go along the party lines. It's a serious professional discussion, sometimes in accordance with the opinion of professionals from IDF or Secret Service. Sometimes the opinions expressed by different ministers are not exactly the same as the opinion of military and security professionals, but in all the discussions I witnessed of late, you couldn't, as I've said, you couldn't tell whether this specific minister comes from Blue and White or Likud or Shas or any other party.
Yeah, a question from the former president of American Friends of Likud, Dr. Julio Messer, who is in fact a doctor. His question was, who's more difficult to deal with, doctors or politicians? And I guess I want to broaden that. That was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. What were the obstacles you were facing to implement the policies that were necessary to alleviate the corona crisis in Israel?
Well, I'm not used to discussing my talents and advantages, but I will quote one of the chief specialists of the health ministry, who was very instrumental in combating the corona for the last several months. And he, after one of the cabinet meetings, said to me, our great luck is that you know how to work with professionals. And I think that it was a very good definition, because by working with professionals, it didn't mean that I always say yes, sir, when a big professor of medicine says that we should act like this or like that. Take the opinions.
Continue.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear.
So I say taking their opinions and running it through internal discussions, and then giving them the political umbrella, the political support during the cabinet meetings, where, as I guess our dear friend Julio Messer knows, the prevailing tone always used to be, why do you keep things closed? People are suffering enough, start opening. And I do have to say, once again, in a non-modest manner, that I was very glad during these meetings that I have this 25 years of experience, including my 7 years in the position of the speaker. And in most cases, the decisions brought by the health ministry were accepted by the government. And I think that it was a combination, as I've said, of trust to specialists who were with me during these cabinet meetings, and a lot of political game, sometimes behind the curtains, in order to push the decisions through the cabinet.
If I can jump in with a question that's on everyone's mind, and actually we've gotten quite a few questions along the same lines with respect to when people from outside of Israel, non-Israelis, can get back into Israel. I've already sent around guidance for those people who have family here, according to the guidelines that the Ministry of Health has put out. But and there's just there are a number of people, including Marty Olener and Sharon Sherman and even Manny Weiss from the UK, who are all asking similar type questions, whether they are homeowners in Israel, they're paying Arnona, and they're paying all kinds of electricity bills here in Israel, but can't get in, or a tour group which is supposed to be opening up the country. It was said that May 23rd, but yet there's still no guidance for that, and whether or not families who have children who are not yet vaccinated, at what point will they be able to get in? Can you give us some idea, or is there anything you can tell us about what the guidance will be and how soon non-Israelis will be able to come back home to Israel?
Well, the good news is that, and thank you, Adam, for sending out these materials, that we have certain criteria right now as far as people having families, especially with different family events, hopefully wonderful events in our lives, sometimes sad events, but we have guidelines finally for this kind of population, mostly definitely Jews, and according to these lines, they can apply for an entrance visa to Israel, as entrance permit. The groups of late May that we may start with, it's a pilot project. It has nothing to do with this kind of population. We are talking about groups who come on a tour, on a guided tour to Israel. So the only thing I can say, because Corona is full of surprises always, and if things continue moving the way they are right now, I think that somewhere in June, July, we'll be able to talk about, let's call it individual tourism, meaning people who could just come. And I don't have a question now about the children. We understand that we'll have to give some kind of answer to that, probably through corona tests, both in the country of origin and in Israel. But right now, as far as the tourists are concerned, we are talking only about those who are vaccinated with the vaccine that is recognized by Israel Ministry of Health, Israel's Ministry of Health. So I can only say at this stage that I don't think there will be any change for the better, let's say, before June. In June, we'll be definitely ready to discuss this issue in the most serious way in order to enable people to come for summer vacation here. I think they definitely deserve
it. A question back again in terms of dealing with international community in the United States. With the Biden administration coming in, we're hearing a lot more about the two-state solution comes up again, that phrase over and over again. Are you expecting pressure on that front? And do you have any sort of strategy for responding to it?
I hear that too. We are not experiencing any pressure so far. I hope that the reports about the Biden administration understanding that you can't at this stage push through any permanent solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be the guiding policy there. I hope that we won't see the repetition of the past, and I'll tell you why it's so important. I think that we are facing tectonic changes here in the Middle East, and I'm definitely talking about Abraham Accords. I want to remind you that not just some prominent American politicians in the past, but also some big Israeli experts. And I'm just not talking about some left-wing member of Knesset. Army generals, chiefs of security bodies here used to explain to us in in the most secret and closed meetings on different occasions, that we have to understand that there's the rule of thumb. There will be no signed peace agreements with any Arab country without full and long-term arrangement with the Palestinians. So now, when the world is changing and we have real relations, not just formal diplomatic relations, but real relations with the Emirates and Bahrain and some others. With Emirates, I'll just give you an example. 3 days ago, something like that, I signed the memorandum of understanding vis-a-vis my counterpart from Emirates. And they were, I should say, at least no less enthusiastic about it than the Israelis. And I think that we have something developing. To throw it all back, basically decades back, because of letting the Palestinians, just by simple refusal to come to negotiations, to go back to the situation where they hold the whole area hostage, I think will be a pity. It will be really, well, as I've said, a huge step back, a huge step in the wrong direction. Now we have the opportunity to do things differently, and eventually it will help the Palestinians too. They will realize that they don't have this hostage situation anymore, and they will start thinking creatively.
If I can, a question from our president, Jerry Platt in New York, a good friend of yours. Even though you're wearing the hat as the Minister of Health, and we all know that, as we've been discussing, you've got much experience in the international diplomatic field. So considering that it appears that Israel obviously has been very successful in addressing COVID, both in terms of treatment, vaccinations, precautionary distancing, how much is Israel involved in spreading this knowledge globally? And is Israel giving preference to perhaps countries that have better relations with Israel, such that perhaps they would be moving their embassies or have moved their embassies to Jerusalem? Could you respond to that?
Well, we have these discussions, let's say, with every friendly country about the importance of moving their embassies, or at least opening some permanent representation office, something like that in Jerusalem. Some of them are very responsive. Some, unfortunately, are facing difficulties as far as this thing is concerned. And we are sharing our knowledge and experience, no strings attached, just because I believe as health minister that it's our best interest. We can't be, as they say in this country, Adam, we can't be a villa in the jungle for a long time. Look, we were just talking about incoming tourism. We ourselves want to restrict it only to those vaccinated. So it's our best interest that in different countries, there will be more and more people who have the so-called green passport and will be able to come. There's a different story. I will be very cautious, but speaking of functional or dysfunctional government and wherever, as you might have heard, we were in the situation where we offered a very limited number of vaccines to different friendly countries, and they were ready to do all kinds of things as a gesture of goodwill in response, including, I would cautiously say, including Muslim countries that were ready to move towards full diplomatic relations with Israel if we would just help them with really very small numbers of vaccines. But as it was good for Netanyahu, some coalition partners woke up and started shouting that vaccines are not our private property. And then the legal advisor interfered. And as a result, we unfortunately lost a lot of opportunities on the diplomatic scene. So I'm trying to speak in a very broad manner, but I do have in my mind specific examples of countries who were very willing to offer all kinds of things if we would have helped in real time with at least vaccinating, say, the medical workers or whatever.
Lawrence Ziefman is asking which vaccines are, you mentioned this before, which vaccines are recognized by the Ministry of Health, the Israeli Ministry of Health, and also Millie Magid, another of our President Club members in New York and Florida, wanted to ask if you could mention some of Israel's innovative treatments to combat COVID-19, like the BriLife COVID vaccine or and the EXO CD24 nasal sprays, some of those things that are coming out of Israel, the Israeli innovation.
First of all, yes, we definitely are not building on just on vaccines. By the way, even in the field of vaccination, when I speak, it's also part of your previous question, I spoke to many counterparts from different countries, starting with most, like, I don't know, from starting with leading countries like Germany or France or Britain, and other well-developed big countries, and with countries from, let's say, a different club on the international scene, and they all were very eager to learn about vaccination. But except for vaccination, and in some cases when, by the way, we couldn't offer the vaccines themselves, we definitely shared our knowledge in terms of the protocol, in terms of different medicines developed here, and they were really very, very appreciative of sharing this knowledge. I won't go into specific details because there are some doctors in this group that have been already mentioned, and I'm, to the great disappointment of my mother, I'm not a medical doctor. So I have to say that I myself had the pleasure of listening to some of these people who created certain treatments or certain types of medicine, but I definitely can't give too many details about it.
So I want to, Steve, do you have other questions? There are a number of questions.
Yeah, I do. You have you mentioned
Steve, sorry, we'll have to finish in a couple of minutes. So
okay, this is going to be fast, and it's an important one, I think. You mentioned you like being a minister. You have many admirers and friends on this call and in our group generally, and I think across Israel. Without putting you on the spot, are you open to taking even more prominent positions on behalf of Israel in the future?
As long as I serve this country in all kinds of public and political positions, I'm prepared for everything. I'll say once again, in a non-modest manner, I think that after this year, I at least don't have any doubts that I could be, I could find myself in practically every position in this country, because the kind of the crisis that we went through, I think it's definitely in terms of length and some other criteria, it's more than going through a war in this country. So we'll see what opportunities present themselves, and I promise you to do my best in every position that I'll be able to take.
So I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Minister Yuli Edelstein, for joining us and giving us this time. There are a lot of questions. A number of our President Club members have asked questions, such as Douglas Altabef and Charlie Rose and Bobby Goldstein and Hal Brill, and we hope that all of those people and more will join us when Israel does finally open up its skies to everyone, not only just groups but individual tourists, on our next mission, which we are optimistically hoping to have in October after the Chagim, and we look forward to seeing you in person in whatever position you are then serving in. Know that after you've served, as you mentioned, as the Minister of Health, you've served in many other challenging, but probably none quite as challenging as this, and we appreciate all that you've done and recognize that all the achievements that Israel has been able to achieve over this last year and gotten to the point where it is in terms of vaccinations and COVID and with respect to the world is largely due to your efforts. And so we thank you for that. We thank you for joining us tonight. And Steve, I want to thank you in California for helping us moderate tonight, and for everyone who's joined us. And we look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Stay well and stay safe. Thank you all again.
And stay healthy. Don't forget, stay healthy.
Stay healthy. Amen, amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.